So we're going to start, as we usually do, with some prayers. So Mary will kindly get those on the screen, and then we can recite them together, beginning with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. And recall that this praise, as well as the verses of homage that follow, the Buddhas, these holy beings, don't need our praise. They're not waiting for our praise, but they're there as a source of support for us. So if we align ourselves by thinking about their amazing qualities and the fact that each of us has the potential to achieve these same accomplishments that the Buddha has and all these other holy beings have, well, then we're creating that synergy, if you will, that will allow us to benefit from their presence in our lives, their guidance, and so on. So, thinking of the Buddha and his amazing qualities, as well as our own gurus, let's recite this first verse and continue through the remaining verses. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage, to all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith, I pay homage. Then we recite this verse that helps us to recollect kind of the fundamental teachings of the Buddha that are in all the Buddhist traditions. So let's recite that verse, and then the second verse on the page that kind of reminds us of the transitory nature of things, as well as their lack of inherent existence, their emptiness. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud. See conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. And we do the short mandala offering, creating this vast pure offering so we can kind of make this an opportunity to generate great virtue, accumulate that kind of positive potential by making this pure offering to the Buddha, as well as all of the holy beings, our gurus, so we can achieve their receive their blessings and become just like them. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then finally, refuge in bodhicitta. As usual, we do this 3 times, first time in English and then the last 2 in Tibetan. And as we recite it, bring to mind these 2 thoughts of reestablishing that firm conviction that you have in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha to protect you and all beings from all fears, all suffering. And then the last 2 lines where we think about the best motivation for being here. We're going to listen to the Dharma, engage in these teachings with the wish to be of greatest benefit to each and every single sentient being. And we do that by wanting to become enlightened ourselves. Once we attain the state of Buddhahood, we will be able to work perfectly for others. So with those thoughts in mind, let's do the recitations. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chunyan Gi Pe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shok Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsu Chi Daki Chunyan Gi Pe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. Okay, thank you, Mary. Let's go ahead and start today. We're about to embark upon the fifth perfection today, the perfection of concentration. So I thought maybe we do just a little bit longer meditation. Again, you can use the breath as your meditation object. This is something we'll actually talk about today in this first class, is objects of meditation to some degree. But there are many ways to work with the breath. If you already have a technique that you use, then you can go to that. Or if you have another object that you have been meditating on, you can use that as your object of single pointed concentration. But if you need a suggestion, again, I generally suggest working with this area around the nostrils where you feel the sensation of the air coming in and out. That very subtle sensation becomes your focal point, and you just try to keep the mind there as best as you can. Whatever type of meditation you're doing as your single pointed focus, be sure to be attentive occasionally to see what the quality of your meditation is. If the mind's gotten very lax or it's gotten very excited and kind of moving out to wandering to various other things, whatever has happened, we try to let that all go and bring the mind back to the breath. So I will ring the chime. We'll do this for a little bit longer than we've been doing before the classes. And again, just as an exercise. And you might even, while you're doing this, pay attention to see what else goes on in the mind. You know, how often does the mind wander? What are the sorts of things that you have that go on for you that cause the mind to get distracted? It's good to be aware of those things. I'm sure many of you have already investigated that. But again, we can spend this time together in silent meditation, being aware of what it is that are our own obstacles, because this is what we're going to be talking about in this section on the perfection of concentration, how we work with diminishing those obstacles and so on. All right, so I will ring the chime here to begin the meditation period. mind's a bit more focused, let's generate the motivation of bodhicitta. And recall in this course we've been examining these ways that we go beyond our current limitations. And this is based in the idea that every one of us has the potential to develop these qualities that we're studying to a limitless degree. When our minds are imbued with perfect generosity, morality, patience, enthusiasm, concentration, wisdom, we then will have no barriers, no boundaries. We ourselves will experience the fulfillment of our deepest potential, and moreover, we will be best qualified to help others, to do what we can to affect their lives in positive ways, becoming a force for good in the world, way beyond what we currently are. So when we engage in the study of things like the six perfections, we do it within that understanding that we're simply works in progress, and we need to continue that forward development, advancing each of these qualities a bit more each day, eventually developing our minds completely into the state of Buddhahood. We see how central it is that we have that motivation of bodhicitta then. What causes us to do this work, what causes us to come to classes and to meditate and do all the things that are involved in our spiritual practice is bodhicitta, is our wish to accomplish the welfare of all beings by working on ourselves, by developing our own qualities into that state of enlightenment. So seeing how central bodhicitta is, cultivate that in your mind right now, that altruistic aspiration to again achieve Buddhahood yourself, so you then can help others to do the same. And think that it's for this reason that you're here today, and make this also the motivation throughout the remainder of today, this week, this month, this year, this life, and even beyond, all the way to enlightenment. Okay, it's wonderful to see you all this morning. So we again are working our way through these six perfections. This course actually started at the beginning of 2020, about a year ago. And then of course with Geshe-la coming in for his 6 months and so on, we set it aside and I resumed it when I returned to teach at TNL in November. So we're moving forward and getting through the last two perfections, which of course are so important. Let me go ahead and put all this perfections on the screen. I think most of you, I need to have the screen share. Be able to do that, Mary. Okay, so again, we've been going through each of these, the six perfections, just very briefly. Let me pull up the slides here and go to the next one. Whoops, went too quickly. Generosity, of course, we started with, again, about a year ago. This is that mind of giving that is the foundation of our practice. When we begin to extend ourselves with bodhicitta motivation to connect with others through giving material things, giving protection, giving the Dharma, even giving loving kindness to others. And then again, these are set out, as I reminded you, have reminded you in almost every one of these classes. They're said to be set out in terms of degree of difficulty gets more as we go further through these. So generosity is said to be the easiest to practice, though again, in any one of these, we might have some that are easier than others. But ethics or morality, of course, is the need for us to have a mind that is engaging in what is virtuous and abandoning what is negative. And those are the two main ways that we practice ethics, as well as benefiting others. This is the Bodhisattva way of practicing ethics, is to do what we can to alleviate the suffering of other beings. And then the third, patience, we went through that, and that, of course, is quite involved to practice. Patience entails having a mind that's undisturbed in the face of harm, in the face of the suffering we have to experience, even in the face of our own practice of the Dharma, having patience with ourselves and with our inability perhaps to understand or to change our minds as quickly as we'd like to. And then finally, we just completed joyous effort, this enthusiasm for our practice, which again it's interesting that that is more difficult than patience. Patience seems very difficult to cultivate, especially in our day and age when we have so many things that can trigger our anger. But joyous effort is more difficult because we do have these tendencies of laziness that do become problematic. And laziness is going to come up again in concentration because it is one of the main obstacles to concentration. So obviously we can't have perfected each of these before we go on to the next, but we do see that we have to have a bit more of that force of enthusiasm and joyous effort if we are to engage wholeheartedly in the remaining two perfections. Now, as I said, concentration and wisdom are very, very important. You know, in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, as well as almost any Lamrim text, and most of you have spent time around Lamrim texts, especially Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, you know that there's sort of a brief survey of the six perfections that happens. And then the last two parts generally of any Lamrim text are going to be a deeper investigation into these last two perfections. That's because they are much more complicated and difficult to cultivate. Concentration, of course, is where we're going now. This is this ability for the mind to remain single-pointed on an object. We need that lack of distraction in the mind to be a very powerful force for changing our minds. Everything that we've done in terms of the other perfections prior to this, we can change our minds to some degree. But without concentration, without some level of stability in the mind, it's going to be very, very hard to make lasting change in the mind. Even with concentration, we can't make final changes to the mind, if you will. That requires the perfection of wisdom. So essentially, once we have developed concentration, we then need to go on to cultivate the wisdom that will make that concentration much more useful. But again, concentration is something we need for all the qualities of the path to develop whatever realizations. And to that end, I want to share a little bit of what Lama Zopa Rinpoche shares. And again, this is the book that I've been reading from occasionally and putting slides on the screen for. It's the book that was published last year on the six perfections, some of Rinpoche's teachings. So he calls it here, he's a single-pointed concentration, which is samadhi in Sanskrit, or tinghe in Tibetan. Again, this is kind of the general term of any sort of meditative stabilization. Samadhi is the term we give to all levels of meditative stabilization, or again, tinghe in Tibetan. This refers to the deep meditative absorption that is free from discursive thought, free from kind of the wandering of the mind, as well as any of the kind of lack of focus to the mind, a laxity or kind of those sorts of qualities as well, the dullness that we sometimes have in the mind. And so he goes on then to talk about this, and I think this is a good place to start our investigation of concentration, is to look at the fact that there are really two types of meditation. Most of you got this kind of fed to you when you started your Buddhist practice, perhaps through Buddhist Meditation 101 or through the meditation module of Discovering Buddhism. But these two types of meditation are really key, and they allude to then the remaining two perfections. The perfection of concentration is single-pointed or fixed meditation, sometimes called stabilizing meditation, placement meditation, different names for this. Again, this is the main topic for the next couple of sessions, is how we work with developing this concentration and utilizing it in our lives. The second one is almost always called analytical meditation. You know, and of course, many teachers say that this is essentially just a very fancy word for thinking. You know, analytical means that we're contemplating things, that we are, using our minds to digest things. Whereas single-pointed or fixed meditation is where we try to reduce that level of discursiveness that's going on in the mind or thought process and actually stay focused. So we have these two types of meditation that again are reflected in the remaining perfections. The perfection of concentration is single-pointed meditation, whereas the perfection of wisdom is the kind of final outcome of our analytical meditation, particularly as it pertains to the wisdom of emptiness, which is, of course, the deepest realization that we all need to have in order to achieve liberation or enlightenment. So Rinpoche goes on to say, except for single-pointed meditation, all the other meditations we do within the Lam Rim, the stages of the path, meditations on our precious human rebirth. That's one of the initial topics right after, relating to a guru, a spiritual guide, bodhicitta, which we just meditated on briefly, and so forth. All of the various topics of the Lam Rim are analytical, where we analyze the subject through logic and scriptural sources. So again, we need to have that investigation into the Dharma. How we change our minds most deeply is not simply by having single-pointed concentration, but by thinking about the teachings of the Buddha and applying them into our own understanding so that we can actually move in a different direction in terms of the world that we live in, as well as the deeper understanding of reality. Within analytical meditation, however, there should also be single-pointed meditation. For instance, say we are meditating on the perfect human rebirth, and at the end of the analysis, the thought strongly arises of how incredibly precious this life is. This is the goal of that type of meditation, right? We want to get to a place where we go, they say that it's comparable to somebody realizing that they have this amazing treasure that that's like a pauper finding a treasure of jewels, and they go, oh my gosh, what I have is so valuable, so incredibly important for me to take care of this because it is so precious, it is perfect. That's the thought we want to get at with that type of meditation. So say we get to that point and we see how incredibly precious this life is. If that happens, Rinpoche says, we should then place our mind on that feeling as long as we can. Holding the mind on that experience means that the next time we meditate on that subject, it will be stronger and there will be a greater possibility of actually attaining a realization. So this is what's taught right from the beginning, right? And most of you probably recall this and hopefully use it in your own practice, is that initially we might do some stabilizing meditation, or this fixed meditation that is, again, going to be the main topic for this part of this course. Then when we get the mind a bit stable, we introduce some discursive thinking, some, in digesting of the Buddha's teachings, bringing to mind, say we are meditating on this topic of perfect human rebirth, and say you're thinking about the amazing qualities of this rebirth. Well, when you begin to feel some appreciation for those qualities, that you really have this amazing opportunity with this life through that investigation, then you go back to single-pointed meditation, but you don't go back to the breath or some other object. You meditate on that appreciation, or that feeling of the preciousness of this life, or the desire to use it most meaningfully, whatever it is in terms of the individual subjects within that topic of perfect human rebirth. That's how you actually, begin this process of integrating those into your mind, is by focusing on them single-pointedly. Now, the strength of that may wane over time, and then we have to go back to the analysis. And in a single session, you might have to do this a couple of times. You go back and you begin to look through the scriptural citations or the reasoning or what have you, and you bring that all to mind and you get the feeling again. Then you go back to the stabilizing, meditating on that single-pointedly. Then when that wanes again, you go back to the analysis. Eventually, you will be bringing these two together. This is one of the topics we're going to talk about a little bit later today, where when you've sort of perfected the one side of it, that is your analysis, you've perfected the other side, that is your stabilizing or placement meditation, then you have to unite those two. And this is how we're training in uniting those, is never just doing just one meditation or the other, trying to integrate them. Now, it does sound like they're totally opposed to each other, right? This is being single-pointedly on something without any type of discursiveness. But that will already begin to calm the mind. As I said, if that's what you start with, and I always recommend starting with that, then you get the mind somewhat calmer. There's not quite as much of the turbulence going on, or even if there is, you're not so attentive to it. That, of course, is the big thing, to be aware of, is that there will still be some discursiveness arising in the mind for quite some time. Thoughts will come in, they're like the waves, but we can simply choose to be in the depth of the ocean. We don't need to identify with the waves and get carried away with them. We can simply find that place of stillness and stay single-pointedly focused. So once we've kind of developed some of that, that is the perfect platform actually for doing investigation. This is what Rinpoche is pointing out in that quote, that if you don't have the mind somewhat calmed already, If you still have the mind quite disturbed by all these various things and wandering away, well, then your analysis isn't going to be very effective, right? Your analysis is going to be weak because you can't stay focused on what it is that you want to focus on and investigate. So even though these sound like they're antithetical, somehow, developing a single point of concentration and then thinking about the teachings through analysis, that these two aren't working together. They actually work together in this kind of two ways that I've talked about. First, stabilizing the mind so that your analysis becomes very powerful. But then when you get to the point of your analysis, using it as your object of stabilizing again. So you kind of keep reinforcing each other. And that's the importance of having a daily meditation practice. One thing I would encourage, we talked in last week's class, which was the first class of the new year, about kind of, making some resolutions or what have you, especially around joyous effort, enthusiasm for our practice. Well, obviously, we need a lot of enthusiasm to engage in meditation practice. And you might challenge yourself with even just, a 30-day. Every day I'm going to meditate for maybe 30 minutes or whatever you're comfortable with, 15 minutes every day, and then make that determination that you're going to do that. If you aren't already doing that, if you're already doing that, maybe you can make a commitment to doing more meditation. But this is how we actually change our minds. I'm not saying all these other practices that we do, many of you might do a Tara practice, might do some recitations of mantras, or might do other things that are really kind of useful in our tradition. Those are good things to do. But if we don't do some portion of our practice being this type of meditation in these two ways, again, doing some stabilizing meditation as well as some analysis, then I think we're really shortchanging ourselves. We're not taking advantage of what we actually have with this human rebirth, to use that topic and kind of relate it to these teachings. Right now we have clarity of mind. Hopefully every one of us is dealing with a clear mind and some good, qualities that we possess. Why not use those as best as you can while you still have this opportunity? Recall that the very next topic after perfect human rebirth is death and impermanence. And we obviously see in the world that we live in right now that death can happen very quickly. With COVID, for example, we can have one day where we think we're quite well, and maybe we went out shopping, a few days ago, and then suddenly we start getting the sniffles and we start, having these changes in our body, and this virus takes over. And for some people, as we know, that is the end of the line for this life. So this is really evidence that we have around us that this life, is really impermanent. As Lama Tsongkhapa says, it's like a water bubble, very fragile and can be burst, without much effort at all. So take advantage of the time that you have. Again, make this commitment, if you can, to using the time that you do possess, which is only today. And we don't even know if we possess all of today, but at least we can say, I'm going to use today meaningfully. I'm going to have a portion of my practice where I actually engage in concentration, meditation through at least these two techniques, again, of some form of analysis on the basis of having some stability of mind. And as Rinpoche says, if we could do this and kind of develop that kind of penetrating into that through getting to that realization through our analysis, and then bringing it back into our stabilizing meditation, placing our mind on that single pointedly, we'll actually have a greater possibility of gaining realizations in this life. He goes on to say, to avert and then destroy our delusions, which of course is one of the first milestones in our practice on the Bodhisattva path, and this is the goal of all those others who practice the individual path, the Hinayana. We need to study what the Buddha taught about them. Analytical and fixed meditations together give us the power and focus to really investigate, as well as the understanding to take our analysis to its most profound level. So we need both of these, analytical and fixed meditation. We need both the perfection of concentration and the perfection of wisdom if we are to get anywhere in terms of attaining true realizations that will transcend way beyond our current limitations, to use the title of this course. Then I love this little quote. This is all from the beginning part of Rinpoche's chapter on concentration. He says, there is no need for faith or anything else at all. Now, I would say, yeah, we have to have some faith or some conviction that gets us involved. But he's talking about in the midst of this type of thing, it's not a matter of faith. It is pure rational analysis. And yet, used in the right way, it can lead us all the way to enlightenment. This is unbelievable. This is mind-blowing. you know, Rinpoche being, his normal self. Of course, I'm sure in the whatever teachings he probably said many more things that are along this line. That he always wants us to think, wow, 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 wow. This is just unbelievable that we have this ability to do this. The Buddhist path is one that, again, very clearly sets out, due to the Buddha's compassion and kindness, exactly how we can achieve the same state that the Buddha attained. So we should feel this amazing, and it develops, it's the confidence, and it has to start, as we saw even looking at joyous effort. We need to have some sort of aspiration that's grounded in faith, that yearns to achieve these sorts of things. So it's not to say faith isn't in the picture, but when it comes to the actual work, it isn't a matter of faith. It's not that we sit there and go, oh, I have faith that that emptiness exists. I have faith that I can become a Buddha. I mean, it's a matter of investigating these and actually finding the teachings to be true for yourself. This is why, again, when we talk about faith, and I did do this as part of the effort when we talked about joyous effort, it's important that we realize that our deepest faith comes when we are convinced through our own investigation and practice. To read something in a book is wonderful, and that's where a lot of it starts for us, or to hear a teaching from a teacher and to go, oh, wow, that's an interesting idea. I never thought of it that way. But then unless you actually take that teaching and you integrate it into your mind and into your heart, it's not going to really produce the result that you are seeking. They use the analogy of it being like medicine that is very powerful, but you never take it. And people come over to your house and you go, oh, I have all this wonderful medicine. And you go, oh, that's amazing. Does it all work? And you go, I don't know. I've never taken it. Well, if you've never taken it, if you've never used anything to get over your own illness, how do you know that the medicine's powerful and that it works? And showing it off to other people doesn't really do much good if you haven't taken it yourself. So again, it all starts with this process of being able to work with our minds. And working with our minds, the main tool is concentration, at least initially. And then, of course, analysis, which leads to that deeper investigation of wisdom, which is so crucial in developing any of the more long-lasting attainments in our life. One of the things that always comes up in teachings, or I say always, but anytime I'm receiving teachings from these great lamas on concentration, they point out that we've had these very deep levels of concentration many, many times. Of course, we've been around since beginningless time, so it's inevitable that we would have encountered teachings that help us to develop concentration, because these teachings do come from, in this world, from the Vedic traditions. The Buddha himself, as Prince Siddhartha, learned these meditative techniques, developed very deep meditation, but it got him to a dead end. There was no progress beyond just developing those deep concentrations to remove all the causes of suffering in his own mind. So he knew he had to do something more with it. But we've all done this. We've developed these deep states of concentration many, many times. But what did we do with them? This is what Rinpoche, I think, is really emphasizing at the beginning of this chapter, is to kind of look at the idea that we do need this skill of a very deeply focused, single-pointed mind. But if we just develop that, it's simply not enough. In fact, a lot of the later passages in that same chapter go into that idea, and we're going to see that a little bit today. We have to be able to unite these two minds. Otherwise, we will go through this process, develop this very wonderful, peaceful state of mind, but it won't do anything. It won't amount to anything. So again, the investigation that we need to do in conjunction with that stable mind is so important. All right, let's go back to the slides and do a little bit deeper investigation then into what we mean by concentration. Again, I generally share at the beginning of each of these a little quote from Geshe Loden, whose Lam Rim book is really quite nice, a more modern Lam Rim book. It says, concentration is a mental factor. Some of you have studied this course of minds and mental factors. Mental factors are sort of functional components, or things that have various attributes in our mind. Mind is sort of the bigger bucket in which all of this happens, but mental factors are what helps round out our experience of things. This is actually said to be one of what are called the 5 object ascertaining or object determining mental factors. It means anytime we are actually getting at an object, concentration is present. but it's capable of abiding one pointedly on an object of virtue without distraction. This is why, I mean, again, we're talking about it in this context. Concentration, we would need to do something that is non-virtuous, probably too. But here, in the context of developing our qualities on the stages of the path, we need an object of virtue to be the object of our meditation, our concentration. And it's doing that without distraction. This is, again, one of the key things that we're going to be talking about throughout this course is how do we diminish those distractions, beginning by the coarser ones, and then, of course, the subtler ones that also need to be removed. When concentration is motivated by bodhicitta, it becomes a perfection of concentration. We've seen this with all the other perfections, right? We describe what they are, and then we say when we unite it with bodhicitta, it becomes a perfection of concentration. Now recall again that this is a case of giving the name of the result to the cause. As a bodhisattva, even once you've developed bodhicitta in this uncontrived way and you start embarking on your bodhisattva path, even though you will fine-tune your concentration as well as other qualities to a great degree, you don't really have it fully qualified until you attain Buddhahood. So we're talking about the perfection that we are practicing now that actually leads to the eventual perfection in the state of Buddhahood. But it is important that we delineate that this is a bodhicitta motivation. As I said, many of these techniques of developing concentration are taught in the Vedic traditions. So they develop very deep concentration, and it doesn't really result in anything beyond the peace in that life, as well as there is some karma that is created that can cause rebirths in very subtle states of existence. But it doesn't get you out of cyclic existence. Even when we were talking, most of you again have studied the Lam Rim and know the three stages or three levels of the Lam Rim, the person of least capacity, middling capacity, great capacity. All of what we're doing is in the great capacity. So we're kind of lodged in that higher motivation already of bodhicitta. But at the second level, the level of the person of middling capacity, there it's taught that the path of even attaining that goal of just one's own liberation from suffering. Again, bodhicitta goes beyond that to embrace the idea of becoming a Buddha for the sake of all beings. But even to achieve one's own liberation, we need the three higher trainings. And recall these. The very first higher training is the training in morality. We've already talked about morality. The morality of a bodhisattva is done with bodhicitta as well. But nonetheless, if you don't have a good foundation of morality when you're moving towards your own liberation, you can't develop concentration. We're going to see this coming up again later as well, and Rinpoche talks about it, how much we do need good morality as a foundation for our practice of concentration. And just think about it. I'm sure you've had occasions where you've had something in interaction with somebody that wasn't so wholesome, it wasn't so great. Maybe you were really even embarrassed to think about the things that you said or did to that person, and you know that that engagement in your own negative actions, it's kind of hard to let it go, right? And even if you do your purification, you might sit down in meditation and the mind is kind of disturbed. It isn't really settling because you've got some action that you engaged in that's influencing you. It's created ripples, whereas you want it to be very, very, very calm and still. So we know that a foundation of good morality is essential. The second higher training is a training in concentration. So even to attain your own liberation, you absolutely need this level of focus. And then, of course, the third one is the higher training of wisdom. And even though it's referring to the same understanding in terms of a realization of emptiness that is essential to accomplish one's own liberation, as Rinpoche just said in that previous screen, in order to abandon all the delusions, the afflictions and so on, we need to have that concentration and, of course, the same wisdom. It's only done with the motivation of one's own liberation. At the level of the middle scope, we aren't yet, or the person who is only practicing that isn't yet at the place where they want to do this for the welfare of all beings. So I'm just emphasizing that because, again, concentration is taught in a variety of areas. And you even have, of course, meditation is now, and mindfulness. These things are just, so widespread. They've really gone mainstream, and I even saw one little thing posted at one website that was all about some website with a little cartoon thing to do meditation and that. And I mean, it's wonderful. It kind of gives people entry points to come in and be introduced to all of this. But it's often being targeted as like, oh, this is a wonderful way to make you better focused at what you do in your life. And then that's fine. But meditation has so much more power. We want to be able to use it to attain, great realizations, to at least, start moving towards enlightenment. So this is the importance of, again, recognizing that with bodhicitta motivation, the practice of our concentration can become a powerful cause for attaining the results of enlightenment, especially when we go on to then unite it with the sixth perfection, the perfection of wisdom. So I'm also going to share with you from Geshe Rabten. I like some of what he said. Again, this is one of the books we use when we study minds and mental factors, which I taught about 2 years ago, I believe, at TNL. And just so you know, I am teaching it on Tuesday nights. It just started last week for the group down in Florida. But anyway, this concentration is described by Geshe Rabten as a distinct mental factor that is capable of dwelling one-pointedly, bearing the same aspect, meaning it's kind of got the same object and holding the object in that light for a sustained duration of time upon a single referent. So this is again describing it in terms of the core concentration that we all do have to some degree, but moreover how we get it to move in a particular direction to sustain that concentration. This, of course, is the goal. And right now we do have concentration, but we just don't have it continuously. It has the function, he says, of acting as the basis for the increase of intelligence, the increase of our wisdom, our understanding. This is what we've been emphasizing so far too, by everything Rinpoche has shared as well. And secondly, of bringing all mundane and supramundane phenomena under control. Now, we're going to be introducing a lot of terms in this course, this one much more so than the other perfections. You may have heard these terms. Of course, we know the word mundane. We hear it quite frequently in daily, maybe not quite daily life, but here and there. But the term supramundane, this is the idea of kind of transcending the mundane, going beyond into what we might kind of call otherworldly, beyond our worldly experience. So let's take a little look at that. Geshe Sopa, who was also Geshe Rabten, who I just had slides on, he was one of Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa's teachers. And Geshe Sopa also was. Geshe Sopa passed away a few years back. His center up in Wisconsin is still around, Deer Park Center. And most of you know that he's written an amazing 5-volume commentary on Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo. And I'm going to quote from him here and there because I really do like how approachable Geshe Sopa is and how he explains things, especially in regard to concentration. So he says, mundane good qualities are spiritual attainments developed on the path by non-Aryas, those whose insight into selflessness or emptiness is not yet direct. So everything that precedes that sort of threshold that one crosses over when one becomes what we call an Arya being or a superior being, that changes kind of the whole karma of what that person is creating. Everything prior to that, any attainments that we have that we call spiritual attainments are mundane because we haven't yet united them with that wisdom. Of course, this is the sixth perfection that we're going to be talking about next, is the perfection of wisdom when we have the ability, through the force of our familiarity with emptiness, to get to a place where it becomes a much deeper realization. I'm not going to go too much into that because, again, that's coming up in the next perfection. But this is a very important landmark in anyone's spiritual progress, whether we talk about somebody, again, who's just going for their own liberation or somebody who's going for Buddhahood, enlightenment. There is what's called the path of seeing, which is your initial direct realization into emptiness. And they say it's such a transformative experience. I don't have this experience. If I did, perhaps I'd share it with you, though it seems that most spiritual teachers and what have you, even the Dalai Lama doesn't make any profession, he doesn't profess to have this realization. But nonetheless, I'm sure that many of these great beings do have this. But they've gotten to a place where they've developed that insight so that it's no longer conceptual. When we think about emptiness, selflessness, or any of the other teachings, we're just thinking about them and developing some idea of them in our minds. We always have what we call sort of a mental image of something. It's not just visual, it's any type of thought that we have about something isn't really getting at the actual object. It's a way of working with it with our conceptual mind. But you do have this landmark occurrence that happens for all of us in our spiritual progress. We can look forward to this. When you cross this threshold, when it's no longer a conceptual awareness of something, where we're just through the force of our thinking, but it actually, through the force of that thinking and the depth of our meditation, it becomes non-conceptual. It becomes direct. And this, again, is a very important kind of going forward from there. All of what we do is supramundane qualities. We develop things that are beyond this world through the force of developing uncontaminated karma, karma that is pure, because we are using that direct antidote to what contaminates the mind, which is our ignorance. So the mundane and the supramundane qualities are delineated by whether it's before this landmark occasion or after this landmark occasion. Let's look at what is shared by Geshe Sopa in the next slide, where he goes on to talk about this supramundane. He says, there are other qualities that are attained by these Aryas, the superior beings, the noble ones, who have realized selflessness directly, emptiness directly. These are the supramundane qualities that lead to nirvana and Buddhahood. Nirvana is his term of referring to liberation, individual liberation, and then Buddhahood, enlightenment. And again, in this tradition, this is how we delineate these two goals. You might hear liberation and enlightenment thrown around in very general contexts, but liberation refers to one's own nirvana. That is a path that the Buddha taught for those beings who simply want to get themselves out of samsara. That's the burden that they can bear, is getting themselves extricated from this cycle of existence. Buddhahood, or enlightenment, is the goal where for those who want to go beyond that. And of course, this is how we want to work with all the teachings of the Lam Rim, is with that motivation. But supramundane qualities are involved in attainment of either of those results, either one's own liberation or one's own enlightenment. So the mundane qualities are a result of strengthening your concentration. The supramundane qualities are the result of cultivating insight into the nature of reality, emptiness, on the basis of that concentration. So once more, we see this nice parallel. This is going to happen throughout a lot of today between the fifth and the sixth perfections. Your mundane qualities that allows you to develop these various attainments prior to this direct insight into emptiness are built primarily upon your concentration, the perfection of concentration. The supramundane qualities, it's not that they don't involve concentration, because as it says there, they're on the basis of that concentration. They require cultivating insight into emptiness. They require wisdom. So once more, we have the fifth and the sixth perfections delineated here. We can say our mundane qualities come about through our practice of stabilizing meditation, whereas the supramundane qualities come about through our analytical meditation. And of course, we're going to see this parallel happen with a number of other terms that we look at today. An uncontrollable mind that is scattered, going here and there, cannot serve as a foundation for the wisdom that uproots the afflictions, or that helps us to remove even the subtler obscurations that keep us from being a Buddha. When you properly employ the techniques for developing, and here we introduce these Sanskrit words for this, shamatha, which is calm abiding. This is how this is generally translated, or sometimes mental quiescence. When we employ the techniques for developing this state of mind taught in the Lam Rim Chenmo, again, that's because that's the text he's commenting on, but it's taught in almost every Lam Rim text, your mind can achieve great stability. It can be free of all of that distraction, that scattering, that not abiding on the object that we are focusing on. Once your mind is trained to concentrate, it can serve as the basis for developing vipassana, which is special insight. All of the mental afflictions are rooted in ignorance, which is the opposite of insight. By removing ignorance from the root with wisdom, you can completely and permanently remove the mental afflictions. When all of the mental afflictions are removed, you will have achieved liberation. And of course, when you remove the subtler obscurations in the mind, you will achieve Buddhahood. So these two terms as well are kind of coordinated with this whole track of, again, concentration and wisdom. When we develop concentration to the degree that we call shamatha, or calm abiding, which is what that main part of the Lam Rim teaches, is the techniques to develop this state of mind that we call calm abiding. And then when we develop the wisdom side of it through our analysis to develop what's called vipassana, or special insight, then we have these two very powerful forces. And of course, we do this one, the development of this wisdom, on the basis of concentration, on the basis of shamatha. So once we unite these two in a union of those two minds, then we have it's your golden ticket. It's your way to actually achieve all the realizations that will help you to transcend samsara yourself, as well as to go to enlightenment, to lead all the other beings to that state. So this is kind of, again, this dual track that we have of these two states of mind that are going to be introduced here in this fifth perfection, but they continue on in terms of the sixth perfection. Because the whole purpose of the fifth is to get you to the sixth, in a sense. It's an absolute necessity. We're going to see this coming up in some of the later slides. Without good concentration, we simply can't develop the stability of wisdom, as was said in one of the slides we just looked at, right? Geshe Sopa mentioning that, if the mind's constantly discursive and disturbed, how can we develop that force of mind? One thing I try to point out as we go through this is, once more, there's these verses from Master Shantideva's fifth chapter that speak to how each of these six perfections are mental practices that we need to engage in. Even though generosity, for example, the first perfection, and does entail being out there in the world doing things for others, it starts, or it finishes actually even with the perfection in our own minds of the intention to give. Well, here it's just highlighting how if we don't have this force of concentration, all of the various things we engage in, whether they are physical or whatever, they're not going to lead to the result. It says here, the knower of reality. Who's the knower of reality? The Buddha taught that even if recitation and hardships are practiced for long periods of time, which of course we just saw, we just finished the perfection of joyous effort, right? Where we want to go about using our lives very forcefully and meaningfully. Even if we do all of that, they will be meaningless if the mind is distracted elsewhere. If we don't have kind of the force of a focused mind, we're going to be doing a lot, but it's not going to actually get us to these deeper goals that we're seeking. So we absolutely need an undistracted mind. Okay, back to a little bit from Geshe Rabten, and I liked how he shared this, because this is, once more, something I did mention earlier, but I think it is important to reiterate. Concentration exists to some degree in the minds of us all. At present, this faculty may be undeveloped and only able to remain on one object for a very limited duration. And no doubt many of you see in your own meditation how weak your concentration is. You get an object that you want to focus on, even if it's something like the breath, which is a fairly easy object to work with, simply because we don't need to contrive anything. It's there with us naturally all the time. And as I said, I will talk about objects of meditation as part of today, but even if you have that kind of ever-present breath that you think it shouldn't be a problem to stay focused on it, you see how quickly the mind wanders away. But concentration, of course, in a deep or broader context, does exist in almost everything that we do. Just like mindfulness. Mindfulness is also one of those five object ascertaining mental factors. You have concentration, mindfulness, the attention, intention. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, intention, I think, is there. And then the final one is belief. Anyway, we won't get into all of that. But these five, kind of, anytime you're getting at an object, which can be even when you are driving your car, right? You need to have some concentration when you're driving your car. You can't have like the mind going all over the place. That's what happens when people get distracted when they're like texting, right? Because their concentration goes to putting in all of the little letters so that they can text with their friends, and their concentration isn't on what's going on the road, what's happening with the other traffic and the lights ahead of me and whatever. We need concentration to do a lot of things. As Venerable Rabina says, we also need mindfulness. Even a thief needs good mindfulness. All these sort of qualities that are in the mind, there's nothing religious or spiritual about them. It's just when we use them in this more focused way to enhance our qualities by focusing on things that are virtuous and so on, that's when they become very powerful. So concentration, we all have it. Mindfulness, we all have it. We just don't have it to the great degree that we would like to, and our minds tend to be like monkeys in a tree, and we just jump from one branch to another, and we don't have concentration for very long at all. Once we let go of that branch, we're on to the next one, and then once we let go to that one, we're on to the next one. And our concentration is just continually, very kind of sectional. It doesn't really have any continuity to it, because we're not staying with anything for a prolonged period of time. This is what we're talking about again in this development of this skill of concentration, is to be able to keep the mind in an undistracted place, focusing on that object as long as we wish. And this is the goal. This is what we mean by calm abiding. We're going to see a little bit later kind of how we go about, seeing that mind, working with that mind, developing that mind. But it's essentially a mind that is going to be able to remain on any object, virtuous object that you choose, for as long as you wish. Right now, again, we sit on our meditation cushion and we're lucky if we can stay with something for a minute even, 2 minutes. I don't know, maybe all of you are much better meditators than me, but it's very hard to have that continuity of awareness for long periods of time. But if you are able to stay on something single pointedly, then you have a great force to your mind. You have the ability to sort of make that whatever you're meditating on part of the fabric of your mind. And that, of course, is the bigger goal that we're striving for. So this is probably a good place to take a little break. It's just about 11 o'clock. So let's go to 11:10, take a break, get some fresh air, stretch, whatever you might need to do. And we'll return and continue this exploration. Again, if you do have any questions that are coming up during the lecture, feel free to put them in the chat box. And you can do that during the break even. Otherwise, again, there will be an opportunity at the end when I'll answer questions. So, okay, I'll see you all in about 10 minutes. Bye. Okay. I noticed there's a couple of questions in the chat box, but maybe I will hold on to those until a little bit later and continue with the lecture for a little while. You might notice that I also put a little petition in the chat box. I don't usually do it, things like that, but in this case, I really feel strongly quite opposed to the death penalty, as I'm sure, if not all, certainly most of you are. And in this case in particular, it's really important that we have our voices heard. And I know petitions aren't the ideal way to go about changing the world, but at least it's something. All right, let's go ahead and go back to the screen. We were talking about this whole idea again of how we do have concentration, every one of us to some degree, but it's just incapable of remaining on an object for that long. But, he says, with continuous effort and practice, its ability to dwell one-pointedly upon a single object can be developed until in a state of total mental quiescence, recall that was another term that's often used for calm abiding, one may remain for days concentrating on a particular object. You don't even get up to check your email or do anything. You just stay abiding on the object because, again, this is how we actually change our minds, is by dwelling on things for much longer periods of time. Kind of changes the fabric of our minds. Concentration, he says, goes on to say, is also an important factor in the heightening of intelligence. We saw this earlier, right? When we are taking a photograph, this is kind of a nice analogy for it, the steadier we hold the camera, the sharper will be the picture. Similarly, the firmer and more intense our concentration becomes, the sharper and more acute becomes our intelligence. So there are other analogies that are used for this. I'm going to share another one in a moment, but anytime that we are trying to do something that involves steadiness or stability, then we need that to be there before we can do the other task. For example, even when we talk about it earlier, I mentioned the 3 higher trainings. The analogy that's often used there is chopping down a tree. Well, morality, the foundational practice, that higher training, is the strength that you have, what you bring to your practice. It's a strong mind then, so the strength of your mind is embodied in the strength of the axe person who is going to chop down the tree. But you need the sort of sharp aim of our concentration, to hit the same place on the tree again and again in order to eventually cut the tree down. If you're chopping at the tree, but you're hitting in a different place every time, well, you're not going to go very far in terms of toppling the tree, right? So that's the analogy that's used there. So you need that sort of steady single pointedness of coming to the same place. That will increase, again, the likelihood that you're going to be able to do this deeper work. But then the wisdom, the analogy in that analogy of the axe person chopping down the tree, is the sharpness of the axe. You can cut through things very quickly if you have this very sharp wisdom. So concentration isn't enough, morality isn't enough. You need, again, the third factor of wisdom in order to cut down the tree. If you have a dull axe, even if you're hitting in the same place all the time, you're not going to make much progress either. So again, these different analogies, holding a camera steady, what have you, The other analogy that's used, I think, is coming up in the slides. Go back to those. Tsongkhapa says that if it is dark and you want to see a painting clearly, then you need a butter lamp that both shines brightly and is undisturbed by wind. So again, an oil lamp or a butter lamp, if you were in a dark cave and there's cave paintings on the wall and you really wanted to get a good look at them, you need both factors, again, of the brightness of it shining, which is like the sharpness of the camera lens or whatever, in the example of the camera, and undisturbed by wind, which is also like, again, the camera being held steady rather than shaking. You know, so he goes on then to say, if the lamp is bright but flickers in the wind, then you will not be able to see the painting clearly. If there is no wind, but the light from the lamp is weak, then you will not be able to see the painting clearly either. So you don't get, you need both of these factors together. And once more, this is what we've been seeing so far in today's class, right? That we need both of them. We need the stability of the mind, that is like the, no wind that affects the candle flame. And then we also need the depth of our penetration into things, which is exactly like, the brightness of the lamp that allows us to see the painting on the cave wall. In the same way, he says, you can cultivate an understanding of emptiness, the ultimate nature of reality, using inference and logic, but the profound truth of emptiness is much clearer when seen through meditation. So again, that being the perfection of wisdom, that is the sixth perfection that we want to develop, that's the main impetus for looking at concentration in the Lam Rim. But all of our qualities that we are trying to realize depend upon having deep concentration. But certainly with regard to the realization of emptiness, it's no different. Okay, so this is where we start moving into the concentration being divided up. Let me go ahead and point out to you what that handout looks like in case you didn't get a chance to download it yet. Again, you'll find this out at the TNL's Dropbox site that you can link to through the web page that has this course on it. This is what we're going to get into now, are these types of concentration. Let me just page through this and show you what else we have coming up. We're going to look at the 6 essential causes for achieving calm abiding. We may start to get into that a little bit today. Then what are commonly called the 5 obstacles to calm abiding and the 8 antidotes to them. And then finally, we're going to get into kind of exploring these 9 stages that lead to attaining calm abiding and kind of how we go about doing that. And then we're going to do the same thing we've always done at the end of each of these perfections and talk about how we make our practice of concentration most powerful to get the best and purest results. And of course, we talk about a number of things in between all of this. But as I said earlier, I think it is really important that we do this type of study. I hesitate a little bit as to whether I want to go into this sort of depth with this Sunday class. But, this Sunday class is meant to be fairly high level. And I know all of you, many of you have been doing a lot of practice and study for many years. So I think it is important that we go into a lot of the depth of the teachings that are taught here. But, talking about concentration reminded me of, I had in San Francisco, I went to hear Laurie Anderson. Many of you know Laurie Anderson. She was doing a little lecture at, I think it was at the Palace of Fine Arts. And she said, when the interviewer asked her, this one of these questions, she says, well, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. And so talking about concentration is kind of the same thing. You want to actually do it, right? So there's something that's maybe, talking about concentration for these various sessions, however many sessions it takes for me to get through it, is nice to hear. It does help us kind of gain our aspiration for wanting to engage in this type of practice. But it's a bit like dancing about architecture. I mean, you want to actually do it, and so that's why once more, I just want to take another moment to plug the importance of doing meditation practice on a daily basis. Maybe I will answer one of the questions Barbara asked about, these express meditations that are occurring at TNL, that I am doing one of the days, Venerable Rabina is doing one, and then Venerable Dundrup is doing the other 3, Monday through Friday. Generally, these express meditations, we do start out with some level of a stabilizing meditation, at least I do. I don't know what everyone else does. That's kind of the initial part of it, is to focus the mind a bit, and then introduce a topic for analysis analysis. And so the question was raised, well, is that kind of a union of these two, of shamatha and vipassana? And again, when we talk about those terms like shamatha and vipassana, we're talking about pretty elevated states of that. It is a combination of our own version of stabilizing and analytical to some degree, because we stabilize the mind. Once we sort of let go of some of the discursiveness in the mind's not quite so agitated, then we introduce a topic. Of course, I can never tell when everybody's settled, so I don't know if I'm introducing a topic when you've already settled the mind or not. But if you're doing this on your own, then you would certainly do that, kind of settle the mind a bit, and then introduce a topic for investigation. So hopefully you're retaining some of that focus that you developed over here, and you're not letting the mind begin to get discursive again. But no doubt we will have some of that. And then when we've done the analysis again, we go back to kind of focusing on that. And I try to incorporate a little bit of that in the meditations I lead on Tuesday mornings, of kind of when you get to a place where you have come to some conclusion from the meditation, try to stay with that a little bit. I don't always emphasize that as much, but that is an important part of it, to kind of go back and forth between these. So we can say we don't have yet a union of shamatha and vipassana, but we do have what we currently possess, which is some measure of working with these two types of meditation. And so again, that's the ideal way to work with it. One thing I might mention while we talk about express meditation is that these are wonderful ways to get together as a community and do practice together. But the whole thing of guided meditation, don't let it become a crutch for you. This is very important. In the traditional Buddhist practices, they don't have guided meditations. In Tibet, the abbot of the monastery didn't get up there and guide a meditation for all the monks in the hall, or, the abbess in the nunnery for all the nuns. This isn't how they go about meditating. You study and you investigate the topics, and then you meditate on your own. You sit quietly and you introduce the topics. And this is why in like Discovering Buddhism, we pass out guided meditations for people to use, to have as a reference point, is so that you can do those on your own. Guided meditation is more of a Western phenomenon. And it's a wonderful way, again, to do practice together. But as I said, don't let it become a crutch, because it is important that you develop the ability to go to your own meditation cushion, sit down, and do your own meditation, and not always depend upon someone else to guide you through that. Certainly at the beginning, it's very useful to have guided meditations. Venerable Thupten Chodron, she has a book that's all about meditations on the Lam Rim. And as part of it, they used to have a CD in the back that has 14 hours of guided meditations. Now, I think when you get the book, you have a little link that, you can go to a website and put in a code or something, and you get all of these meditations you can access. Well, that's wonderful. And use those 14 hours of guided meditation to help you to meditate. And even when it's beyond beginning, and you occasionally have times where the mind maybe isn't feeling so focused, and so it's nice to have someone else guiding you. But there are severe limitations to guided meditation. They don't help us to really develop that ability to go deep within ourselves. The other thing is that, as I mentioned, and these meditations that I lead on Tuesday, they're nice, but it's like a half hour. You got to cover so much or whatever, and then you don't know whether people have really fully digested the previous point before you go on to the next point, and you don't know, how much time people need. And if you're meditating on your own, you're in charge. You're the one guiding yourself, and that way you can spend the amount of time that you need to. So if you get to the first point you're going to meditate on, say you're meditating on 3 points, and the first point's really juicy for you, and a lot of stuff comes up, then it's best that you stay with that point, and not, then Don comes and introduces a second point, and then you're off on the second point, but you were really enjoying the first point, and you were really getting to make some progress with that. Well, this is the disadvantage of a guided meditation, is because you're working with a group of people and a leader who's kind of introducing things on the basis of their own assessment of how to manage that material. So there are a lot of limitations with guided meditation, but nonetheless, it's a wonderful tool for us to use. So to go to a guided meditation retreat is useful, but to do meditation retreat on your own is much more beneficial in the end. But guided meditation can help you get there. It certainly is a useful tool for many people. So I'm not in any way putting it down. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, don't let it become a crutch. Don't think, oh, I can't meditate unless somebody else is telling me what to meditate on. that would be a not such a good place to be, because who's going to be that person for you all the time? I guess you can take the 14 hours of Venerable Tipton Chodron's meditations on retreat with you, but nonetheless, it's ideal. Because even in her recording, you'd have to pause her recording if you want to spend more time on a particular topic, right? You're still going to have some limitations even with recording. So sorry, I'm getting on a little soapbox about that, but I just think it's important to emphasize that they're not a tried and true method for achieving enlightenment. Nobody was there, telling the Buddha how to meditate when he was under the Bodhi tree, achieving enlightenment. It's all an internal thing, an internal process that does need to become internal at some point. So I will go back to some of the other questions that are raised shortly when I finish the lecture part of today. Let's go into, again, what I just pointed out on the handout. The first section had to do with how we would divide concentration. What are the types of concentration? And here, we've been looking at kind of generally, it's always been about 3 divisions. Here, it depends upon whether you talk about it in terms of its nature, its direction, kind of what it is directed towards, or what its function is. So let's look at these. And again, I going through these simply because I think it is useful to get an appreciation for all the varieties of things that fall into this category of concentration. The first is a bit similar to what we saw earlier in terms of mundane and supermundane qualities. Mundane concentrations are those that are motivated by the wish for attainments within cyclic existence, where we are primarily about developing concentration to have more happiness in this life, or to develop a more peace of mind and what have you. That's perfectly fine. It can be used in that way. But to get to the supramundane concentrations is most ideal, those that are motivated by the wish for the attainment of either liberation or enlightenment, these results that we often call definite goodness. Higher rebirth or high status is another goal that the Buddha taught. That's also more mundane. The happiness of this life, the happiness of future lives, these are all mundane concerns. But to attain liberation or enlightenment, those definite goodness, those states of goodness and well-being where we won't fall from those, that we need a supramundane concentration for, which once more is delineated by whether we have attained a realization into emptiness as well. Now again, here it's just talking about them in terms of how they are motivated, but to actually attain them at a fuller degree would require us to cross that threshold I mentioned earlier. So here, a little bit from Geshe Sopa on elaborating on this. He says, all good, wholesome, and virtuous qualities and merits are the result of shamatha and vipassana. This includes all of our mental development and spiritual realizations from the mundane to the supramundane levels, including even Buddhahood itself. If you want mere temporary peace, shamatha alone can provide it. The cessation of all distracting and troubling thoughts is achieved by developing shamatha. But even if you have this deeply concentrated mind where all thoughts are suspended, it will not mean much and will not help much. Now, I mentioned earlier that all these teachers have said we've attained those states many, many times. You've developed these deep concentrations. Just as a point of reference, they say that there's sort of the beginning concentration that gets us to calm abiding. Then there are 2 kind of additional levels that each have their sub-levels. One have to do with what we call our form realm concentrations, where we develop deeper and deeper refinement of our minds. And those actually can result in a rebirth in what's called the form realm. Because of the power of that concentration, you have that type of state of mind when you're reborn there, but you still have a body, much subtler body than we currently possess in this life. And then you can go on to the formless absorptions, which are even more refined concentrations. We're developing even subtler states, and you end up in formless existences from there. And we've been in these formless existences. The highest one of the formless existences is called the peak of cyclic existence. What's sometimes given the name nothingness, but its moniker is the peak of cyclic existence. You're still in cyclic existence. You can attain this extremely subtle state of mind, but you only end up still in samsara. And of course, the depths of samsara are the hell realms where we have the unbelievable suffering. But, that's within the desire realm. But nonetheless, when we start developing concentration, if you don't do anything beyond mundane concerns with it, developing these states of mind for the sake of good rebirths or what have you, or for good qualities within cyclic existence, peace of mind, you're never going to attain anything that's more lasting, because you will fall from those states eventually. You end up developing that state of mind that's the peak of cyclic existence. You take rebirth there, and then eventually the karma wears off and you fall to some other existence. Again, depending upon your own individual karma. So there's a ceiling there, not a glass ceiling. It's a ceiling that is concrete. You cannot get beyond it, period. The only way to go beyond it is to practice supramundane concentrations. And he talks about that. Again, this is something very similar to what was shared earlier. The root of our problems is ignorance, and thus the antidote to our problems must be wisdom. You need to remove from its root your mistaken understanding and grasping at the true existence of self and phenomena. All the other things we do with meditation will still keep us simply trapped in psychic existence if we don't unite it with wisdom. So again, this is the theme for today. It can also be divided according to its direction. Concentrations that are directed towards attaining calm abiding, toward attaining special insight, and toward attaining the union of the two. And again, that you do achieve this very powerful mind where you're able to bring them both to an apex, a much higher quality. We initially have to engage in calm abiding, which is why we're studying this as part of the perfection of concentration. And then we have to take that as a platform for deepening our insight into emptiness until it eventually is cultivated as special insight. On the basis of that, we then have both of them at a place where we can unite those. We can have a union of calm abiding and special insight. You may have actually heard this term before. And what was being said, actually, take it off slide for a moment, by Geshe Sopa earlier, was this idea that all of our realizations are actually achieved on the basis of that. So when we talk about realizations, maybe this is a nice little footnote to spend a little time on, because we use this term all the time, right? We say, oh, I want to have a realization of emptiness. I want to have a realization of this. We have things that precede realizations. Absolutely. That's the whole understanding that we have about our path, is that when we begin to investigate these teachings, we have some kind of drop, the penny gets dropped here and there, right? We get a little bit deeper understanding of things. We continue to develop our awareness of things. But to get it to actually a place where we might call it a fully qualified realization, we need to have both of those factors, some stability of mind and some sharpness to our analysis. Without having both of those, we can't make it more lasting. We can't make it to something that, as I said, sort of changes the fabric of our mind. That's why when we hear these teachings, it should be, going back to the last perfection, give us great aspiration to want to practice in this way, right? Because we see that all of what we're doing, we can bring it to such a larger level, to a greater level of accomplishment, if we unite it with these factors. It's not to in any way discount what we're doing currently. It is important that you meditate in your own way, not having that fully qualified shamatha and vipassana. That's okay. That's how you get there. There's no other way that you get there, right? The old thing about, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, there's only one way to get to that kind of place where you will have this greater accomplishment. It's by practicing now. And all of your practice now culminates in these various states of mind, calm abiding and special insight, and the ability to unite the two to become a very powerful force. Another analogy that might work, I don't know that I've seen this in the Tibetan text so much, is a magnifying glass, right? You need kind of the magnifying glass to stay still. If as a kid, I probably, besides burning leaves, I know I burned little insects. I apologize and feel bad for all of that. I regret that and want to be purified. But anyway, when you're using like it to burn a leaf, you have this magnifying glass, and if it's not steady, right, if you don't have the ray hitting the same place, it's never going to burn the leaf. It's just going to kind of keep moving around. But if you have it very steady and you have a very bright sun coming through it, which is kind of like the sun of wisdom, then of course you have that same thing happening. The steadiness of the magnifying glass being held with the brightness of the sun will definitely burn through the leaf, burn through our ignorance, burn through our misunderstandings, because it's not just the ignorance that clings to things as inherently existent that our wisdom of emptiness is counter to. It's also our misunderstanding about conventional reality, what the Buddha taught in the first noble truth in terms of understanding the situation that we're in and so on. all of the teachings of the Buddha, as Rinpoche said in that quote way earlier in the class, all of that needs to be incorporated in analytical meditation. And when we unite it with this mind of calm abiding, then we develop greater insight into the teachings of the Buddha. So let's do just a little bit more, and then I'll take a few more questions. Let's actually cover the commentary that I have for this. This is, again, is what's on your handout in the little box for these three, the ones by direction. The three directions are essential components for the practice of the path to enlightenment. Without the attainment of the stable mind of calm abiding, it is not possible to gain realizations, and more importantly, calm abiding serves as the basis for generating special insight. Again, you have to have that sort of calmness of the mind in order for it to more deeply penetrate into reality. Without the attainment of special insight, which was the second in terms of direction, it is not possible to generate the force of wisdom realizing emptiness that will purify all the obscurations. And of course, all the other qualities, we can say we do gain insight into those. Special insight is often reserved for this insight into emptiness. But nonetheless, we need insight into all the teachings of the Buddha. Thirdly, without the attainment of the union of shamatha and vipassana, these two together, it is not possible to completely eliminate the delusions from the root and attain liberation or enlightenment. So we need both of these forces, as is exemplified by the magnifying glass and the flickering candle or butter lamp, and the other one that was shared earlier, the axe and what have you, so. Oh, and there was another one even. Anyway, you get the gist of it. Yeah, let's finish off this first part, I think, and then we'll take our little break and answer questions. It can also be divided according to its function. Concentrations that provide mental and physical bliss, concentrations that engender special qualities, and concentrations that benefit others. Once more, this is within the context of the perfection of concentration practiced by Bodhisattvas. So we need our concentration even to benefit others. Those that provide mental and physical bliss include all actual concentration, since they all engender those types of bliss that is experienced in this life, or that are experienced. I think I made a mistake with my grammar there. So mental and physical bliss, we're going to see this coming up. This is kind of the culmination of our mind of calm abiding, and it continues on through all of the concentrations, formless absorptions, whatever, if we do go further in our development of a refining of our minds. But when you develop calm abiding, you have this quality that they call pliancy or serviceability. This means that you've gotten the mind to a place where it's very blissful and at peace, and the body as well. And it's hard for us to imagine because we think we're stuck with these kind of clunky bodies that, when we sit on the cushion, we find so hard to keep them in the right position, and legs fall asleep and think back starts hurting or whatever. And we think that there's just no way of changing that. Well, actually, when you gain this level of attainment of calm abiding, all that shifts for you, and you have this mental and physical bliss. So what was pointed out in that slide and on your sheet is that all concentrations that are qualified concentrations, actual concentrations, have that for that, that quality of providing some level of mental and physical well-being or bliss. The second one, in terms of those that engender qualities, I actually have a little more on this. Sorry, I forgot that I put that in there from Geshe Sopa. This is from his third volume of his Lamrim Chenmo commentary. He says the first type of meditative stabilization that produces mental and physical peace, is mundane. It focuses on this life. The mind is usually distracted. Wandering discursive thoughts dominate our lives. With the first type of meditative stabilization, we control the mind. We are no longer distracted and can easily focus upon any object for as long as we wish. This power calms the mind, and because the mind and body are connected, it also influences the body. Thus, by controlling the mind, its vehicle, prana or air, wind energy, is also tamed. That should say is also tamed, not it also tamed. Mundane meditative stabilization brings mental and physical peace and bliss in this life. So here we are still talking about it being somewhat mundane, but it's not to say that that doesn't carry over into our super mundane concentrations. Second one, Concentrations that engender special qualities are those that develop such qualities as the various forms of clairvoyance, the realization of bodhicitta, and so forth. So we can talk about even here more mundane qualities such as clairvoyance, though if we use that quality in a very profound way, it can actually become much more kind of in the vein of super mundane. So here, Geshe Sopa talks about this, the second type of meditative stabilization, and he called that meditative stabilization that accomplishes good qualities, yields a number of mental achievements. These attainments are not particular to bodhisattvas, Hinayana practitioners, both what are called the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas. Again, I don't want to go into too deep in a discussion of those, but we have two different types of practitioners that aim for their own liberation. The Shravakas are the hearers who attain that liberation in a very common way by being around teachers and so on, congregating. And then the Pratyeka Buddhas, who are also known as the solitary realizers, who want to actually attain their own liberation in an existence where there are no teachers around. His Holiness has said this seems like a form of pride, but they actually then teach on the basis of achieving that. And since there are no teachers around, they can be very effective in teaching others. But these are both beings who are only slated for their own liberation. Even they attain qualities when they practice meditative stabilization. When you attain some of those concentrations that go beyond calm abiding, you actually have the basis, for example, for attaining clairvoyances, such as the clairvoyance that knows past lives. When a person develops meditative stabilization in combination with certain techniques, he or she obtains the first mental achievement, the 6 supernormal knowledges, the clairvoyances. Okay. Another mental achievement is called liberation, but here it doesn't refer to emancipation from samsara. It is instead a meditation practice with that name. And Geshe Sopa says this is a complex practice that I will not go into here, and I'm not going to go into it either. But just know that there are other things that fall into this category of engendering qualities. But obviously, it also includes any of the good qualities we develop along the path that are not developed through a super mundane, necessarily through a super mundane realization, such as bodhicitta and so on. Concentrations that benefit others refers to those that use one's powers to accomplish the 11 activities that benefit other living beings. These are the same 11 ways of helping others taught in the context of the perfection of ethics, and we also saw them a few Sundays ago on in terms of our perfection of joyous effort, because we can also have that sort of enthusiasm engaging in the practice of benefiting others. So these, just to be reminded of these, I'm not going to read them all because, again, you've seen them before, but all these various cases of beings who need help and need our benefit, we want to benefit them. As Geshe Sopa says, though, in regard to this third type, meditative stabilization that accomplishes the benefit of other sentient beings, it's involved when we take steps to meet the needs of these 11 types of beings. And there's a particular meditative stabilization associated with each activity, because we need the ability to focus, and we must discern the object, the goal, and the appropriateness of each action. This is how we actually become very effective. If you have the power of concentration when you engage in all these actions, you will then be able to benefit people much more clearly. Without the right conditions, it will take a long time to gain the realization. Oh, this is getting into the 6 essential causes. Sorry, stop there. Erase. Okay. So these are the types of concentration. And again, they do give us kind of the lay of the land of what we're going to be looking at. Again, in the context of this course, we're going to mostly be looking at, as we normally do in the Lamrim, how do we develop that initial stage of mental stability we call calm abiding. We all have concentration prior to that to some degree, but we really need to feel inspired to engage in the type of practice that will lead us to attaining that level. Because once we have that level, then we have this platform that we can build in developing all of our realizations. Can increase our insight into things and what have you. Okay, so let's see. Let me go back to, there was one question here from Leah. Question, sometimes it can be difficult to find a quiet place without distraction, so I don't even try to meditate. Should we just try anyway in the midst of a noisy environment? And how do you decide how much you meditate and how much you study or say mantras, etc.? Okay, well, these are both kind of difficult questions in some regard, because I don't know that there's an easy answer to either one. If it is if you're at the point where there's so much distraction that you know that the time you spend on the cushion is probably not going to be beneficial, then I'm not so sure that it is beneficial. Nonetheless, having said that, there is actually a meditation that is, and what is the name of that book? It's on my bookshelf over there. And I can't even remember the author right now, but he actually says that there are times when perhaps you can use noise as a object to meditate on. You can actually take, okay, normally we might be working with the breath or something, but say there's this noise going on, you can become aware of the noise and just use the continuum of noise being there. And even if there isn't a lot of noise going on, there's always some subtle noise, right? That sort of hum that we have with the body and, our breathing, the sound of our breathing, or just the general, thing that's going on in the space around us. There's always some level of noise, like my refrigerator running in the kitchen. There's something that's going on. Instead of getting caught up in those noises like we normally would, you can actually make that your meditation object. And you can stay present with the continuity of noise that there is, whether it's loud, soft, in the middle, whatever's going on, you can make that your object. Um, I'll find the book and I'll mention this next week when I reconvene the class and what have you. But the idea is that that is one way to work with noise, is to make it your object of focus. Now, of course, it's very hard for the mind not to get involved in that, especially if there are a lot of people talking and things going on and you kind of are curious about what's happening. You don't want to let the mind go to that place of sort of analyzing. You want to stay present with just the continuity of noise and just simply make that your object. But for many of us, if the noise and the environment is too distracting, we're going to simply create patterns that are not so useful. This is why, too, another thing that often happens is the exact opposite thing, where we're not being distracted outwards, but we're quite dull inside. If you're very sleepy, maybe you're not getting a lot of rest, had a lot of challenges, things in your life or whatever, and then you sit on your meditation cushion and you just get used to sleeping practically, just going into that zoned out place. And maybe you set your little timer so you get up and you do whatever you need to do to end the meditation. But if every meditation period is about you zoning out and almost becoming asleep, well, that's not so helpful either. We don't want to create patterns around any of these things. So for each person, they need to determine what's going on. If this is a regular thing, if you're always needing to meditate in a house where there's a lot of activity going on, people, doing things, what have you, well, then you may need to just find your ways of working with that, making, again, that the noise your object, or doing what you can to heighten your concentration on the object, the breath or what have you, so that you don't get distracted. Distraction is going to be with us all the time, as I mentioned earlier, even the mental distraction, not to say the external distraction, but the mental distraction of thoughts coming up, those waves coming in, they're going to still keep arising. We just have to make a choice that we're not going to follow them, that we're not going to get caught up in them. So there is some benefit for many people to stay with those things and to find a way to work with them. But if it becomes a pattern where every day you're doing that and the mind is just getting used to calling that your meditation, this place of being distracted, well, then I don't know that that's so beneficial, because it creates those unhealthy patterns. In regard to this determining how much we should meditate, study, or even in a meditation period, how much we should meditate on stabilizing versus analytical. Again, this is probably very individual. I think many of us, we need initially, when we come to the Dharma, a lot of analysis and investigation of teachings, and we don't necessarily need to focus on developing concentration. In fact, when we look at the three types of wisdom that we want to generate, the very first one is simply called the wisdom through hearing and listening, which also includes our reading. But it means you have to get around the teachings enough to have the force of those come into your mind, to then begin to move your mind towards developing the other levels of wisdom. But the second one you can even incorporate without too much stability of mind, and that's wisdom arising from reflecting, thinking, contemplating. That can be done simply by, after a teaching like this, you might sit down and think about it, review it in your own mind, see, do you have questions on the basis of what, was discussed in the slides that were shown, and blah, 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 and, putting it all together into kind of your own framework. And that may even be some of your own analytical meditation that you do on your cushion, but it's still at the level of simply thinking. It's kind of processing. To get to the third wisdom, which is the wisdom arisen from meditation, that's where you really need to have the stability of mind. In fact, they say that all the wisdom arisen from meditation is arising from some union of calm abiding and special insight, or something approaching that, something where the mind can be very stable and yet quite penetrating. So it doesn't deny, again, that you need those first two levels of wisdom. You need to have the wisdom that you accumulate through hearing the teachings and reading the books and what have you, and thinking about them. But unless you have, because unless you have those, the third one's never going to develop. But you don't really have to have a strong amount of concentration to do the first two. So again, each of you will probably have to take a look at your own practice and say, to what degree do I need to do more of one thing than another? If you feel like you've gone through the Lam Rim a couple of times, healthy number of times, and you don't feel like that's going to, be as productive, then it might be best to focus on that analysis of the Lam Rim, doing what you can to bring that into your meditation practice and to heighten your stability of mind so that you can actually gain some insight into that. For many of us, though, we need to continue to do investigation of the Lam Rim. And probably for all of us, we still need to do it to some degree throughout our lives, but it should become more a meditative practice than it is a study practice, perhaps. The study does augment it, but it's not as important. So it really depends on where you're at in your own spiritual development. Every one of us needs to get the lay of the land quite a bit. So we need to have a good understanding of what the Lam Rim is all about and what all these teachings are about, these six perfections. And then once we feel fully inspired by all of that and we have some confidence in all that, then we can do the deeper work. But in the meantime, it's not important to do some level of this. It is important to have some continuity of some portion of your practice be stabilizing meditation, some be analysis. But again, recognize that the depth of those are going to be very much influenced by where we're at individually. Now, the mantras and other spiritual practices, many of you, very much love doing these practices, like a green Tara practice or a medicine Buddha practice or whatever. If it's working for you, I think those are really important to keep in your practice as much as possible, because they are kind of another level of our practice, and Rinpoche emphasizes them for a reason. Because one of the things we're going to touch on, I didn't get to this today, one of the slides that's going to come up is Rinpoche talking about, okay, we might put into place all these various things that we think will be necessary for us to attain these great realizations. But we also have to recognize that we need juice in the tank. We need merit. We need all these various things that are not so tangible. Whereas like having a quiet place to practice and blah, 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 all these things might seem a bit more tangible. This is not so known to us. It's a bit hidden. We have to have that force of our own kind of aligning ourselves with the gurus, with the holy beings, which is done through those more devotional types of practices. That's why those of you who are relatively new, I don't know everybody who's here today, but if you're relatively new to meditation, you might start with Kathleen McDonald's book, How to Meditate. She divides it into kind of analytical meditations, of course, starts with stabilizing meditation and even goes into devotional practices and those sorts of things, which in Tibetan Buddhism in particular are very much a part of our practice. So it is important that, you do spend some portion of your day on that, if that, again, is where you're at and what you really want to kind of emphasize. So it becomes a pretty tall order. We might say, okay, I do some of this, that's my stabilizing meditation. I do some analytical meditation. Of course, I have to do some study because I'm still learning the Lam Rim, and then I have to do some of these other practices. But again, slowly, slowly. Don't feel like you have to do them all, all the time, but, do what you can every day. Mary's got her hand up. Yeah.
And Don, I just wanted to mention to the community that Kathleen McDonald, actually Venerable Sangye Kadro, will be doing Lam Rim meditation for us. She'll be doing a series of 8 weeks. This begins in April. It's during the day from 10 to 11, but we're really excited about that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's her ordained name, Venerable Sangye Kadro. And she's really wonderful. I've only met her once, and but she's really very sweet and such an accomplished, practitioner and meditator. So it's great that we've got her lined up to do that. I'll have to remember that myself. Hopefully I'll have time to participate. Okay, so again, I don't think there's an easy answer to this question, and I think that again, sometimes it might also depend upon what's going on in our lives, and again, that it can be a distraction for us if we're engaged in things that don't need to be in our lives, but a lot of us have necessities and things going on at times that might block the amount of time you have for all of these. So I would say, again, my bottom line usually is to do some measure of practice, even if it's only 5-10 minutes of meditating. And that can be, again, some bit of stabilizing if you have time, a little bit of analytical. I also really emphasize doing, purification practice at the end of every day. As Venerable Urbina often shares, Lama Zopa has said, you're insane to not do purification practice. So I don't want to be insane. So with my sanity, I want to, always make sure that I do some portion of purification practice. Beyond that, it's whatever we can fit in and the amount of time that we can spend. And if any of you do want to, talk to me or to Geshe Sherab or anyone else, it's good to maybe talk a little bit. Don't share your practice with people widely, but if there are teachers who you'd like to talk to about what you're doing and what their thoughts might be on that, certainly most teachers are open to doing that. Let me go on to the next question. I think Larry had a question. Let me pull that up here. To achieve concentration, is the meditative posture of Varachana absolutely necessary? And if one is physically unable to assume that posture in this rebirth, yet has developed wisdom sufficient for achieving calm abiding, must that person wait for a subsequent rebirth with the necessary physical requirements for concentration? That's a good question. I haven't gone into these. I thought about introducing them at some point, and maybe I'll make a handout with the 7 postures available that Mary can post on in the Dropbox. These are said to be the ideal posture, and how they are emphasized because of Vairochana, this Buddha who exemplified this way of attaining enlightenment in that posture, which Shakyamuni Buddha also possessed the same, posture. But it's more important the quality of the mind. Posture does support it, because when you align things, and this is again getting into a little bit of the tantric teachings, but when you align things physically, the subtle energies of the body are much more easy to work with. The winds will calm down and you have the ability to use the mind more constructively. But nonetheless, it's been pointed out by many people that Maitreya Buddha, the future Buddha, will be the 5th Buddha of this fortunate eon. Shakyamuni Buddha was the 4th. He's in sitting posture, like sitting in a chair like I am right now. He's not with the legs crossed and, the full lotus posture and all of this other, going on. So know that all teachers that I've talked to about this seem to indicate that it's an ideal posture, but not a requisite posture. It's not absolutely required for you to attain these greater states. Now, it can be challenging when you can't do that, obviously, and we have to perhaps overcome some of those obstacles. Certainly, if you have back problems and you have to lay down, all the teachers, again, I've heard from say you can meditate lying down. Just beware that lying down isn't the ideal posture, because that's what we do when we go to bed. So it's not going to be the most supported posture, but nonetheless, it does support deepening our concentration if that's all that we have. That's the best that we can do. So again, each of us will probably have many other factors involved, and I'm going to get into this next week in terms of some of these other things that might become obstacles, how we kind of create these ideal conditions for being able to attain these deeper states of meditation. But again, doesn't seem from what I've heard that it's absolutely required. Rather that these are more ideal because they do line things up correctly. And maybe I'll even go through briefly the 7-point posture next week. So again, make what effort you can to have as many of those elements of the posture in place as you can support with your own physical body. Know that there's also a wonderful book that's called The Posture of Meditation. I think it was just republished by Shambhala. Um, Here, something Johnson, I think is his name, Larry Johnson or Ron Johnson, or I can't remember what his name is. He wrote this book that is all about kind of finding that ideal posture within your own, body, and using some tools to help you to get there, to kind of recognize what's all entailed in that. So again, it's useful to have the posture be as correct as possible, but it's not essential from the Tibetan point of view. Maybe from the Zen point of view, it's much different. Get whacked with a stick if you don't have the right posture. So let me go on to the final question. I think there was one more. Okay, yeah. No, this question is actually more for Mary, that the Lam Rim, will it be recorded for those of us that may not be able to? And it will be. Okay. So were there any other questions from anybody else who didn't get a chance to put it in the box? I don't think I missed any in the box. Anyone? I'm not seeing any hands. Again, you can put up the little hand thing on your screen, because sometimes I'm not seeing a lot of the people who don't have their cameras on, so I can't see if you have a question if you're raising your hand. But okay. Well, maybe that's good enough for today. So again, I would encourage you over the next week, just to be attentive to making sure that you have some portion of your day where you do that, even if it's only 5 minutes. Geshe Sherab, I've heard him teach on this before, and he says it's so important that we have a continuity of practice. Even if we, are in a really bad shape one day, we're not feeling so well, or maybe we're sick or whatever, we try to do at least some practice. Even if, it's very hard to sit up or to do anything, do what you can to kind of keep putting those drops of water in the bucket. Every drop will cause the bucket to fill. And it is important that we have that continuity. Trying to get ourselves kind of keep moving in the same direction. If we start letting it go, then it's a slippery slope. And before we know it, we won't be meditating at all, or we won't be doing our study or practice at all. So just be attentive to that, but do what you can over the next week. And as I did in the meditation we led this morning at the very beginning, just at 5 or 6 minutes, I think it was, of meditation on the breath, then during that time, just or any of the time that you meditate in this over the course of this next week, begin to pay attention to what's going on. And try to have that other factor that's sort of observing what's happening, to see, is the mind getting really kind of moving out towards various objects that we get excited about or interested in, or is the mind kind of caving in? We're going to talk about those more in the future. These are kind of the two forces that keep us from having the sort of stability on the mind, because the mind's so discursive, or the intensity to the mind, the clarity within the mind, because the mind gets very dull. And begin to start paying attention to what generally goes on for you. And maybe you're already quite aware of that, because we're going to talk more specifically about how do we rectify those things. And this is where we're going to move into in next class or two, at least. So, all right, it's noon. So let's go ahead and get the prayers up. Thank you, Mary. And we will, again, dedicate. We can bring to mind all those beings that we are specifically holding in our hearts, who we've offered to pray for, or who have asked us to pray for them. And we think about those beings, but we also think about all beings as we recite these wonderful verses from Master Shantideva, wanting all beings to have complete freedom from suffering and to attain their greatest well-being. May all beings everywhere plagued by sufferings of body and mind obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. And then we recite this final verse that has to do with our complete commitment to this path, to do whatever it takes to benefit others. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. And we do some prayers for our precious teachers. Again, recognize that they're a key part of the development of our wisdom. As I mentioned earlier today, that wisdom that arises from hearing, listening, we need these beings to continue to impart the Dharma to us and to continue to take an interest in our spiritual development so that we can accomplish the goal of enlightenment. So with that in mind, we make strong prayers for their good health and long lives of these three teachers as well as all spiritual guides. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then for Osalhita Lama Yeshe's reincarnation. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for being here today. I will try to get this 7-point posture handout to Mary later today, as well as the slides from today with a few corrections, so that you have those to refer to. Those will be out in the Dropbox before too long. Getting a little something in my throat here. All right, everyone, take care, stay safe and healthy, and I'll see you all again soon.